If you are working harder than everyone else, but still getting passed over promotion, it's not your skills. That's the problem. You might be a great manager, but if the people at the top do not see you as a leader, you're going to stay stuck where you are. Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dyer. Today, we're looking at something that affects so many high performers, the gap between doing a great job and actually being recognized as a leader. We are going to explore how to shift your mindset and your positioning so that you can finally step into the roles that you've earned. Today, my guest is Shirley Sutton. She helps people navigate that important jump from team member to leader. That shift where leadership becomes less about doing everything yourself and more about building confidence, influence, communication, and the ability to lead others well. This conversation is about leadership, growth, confidence, and what it really takes to step into the next version of yourself. Shirley Sutton is a leadership coach and people and culture leader with an extensive background in talent and recruitment. She has spent years identifying, developing high potential leaders inside large corporate and enterprise organizations. Shirley is the creator of the Managers Leaders program, where she helps high performers get unstuck and transition into the senior leadership roles. Through her signature authority shift method, she focuses on leadership, mindset, personal branding to help people stop waiting for the recognition and start leading with influence. Shirley, it's great to have you on the Champion Mindset Collective. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure. Shirley, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey in life from childhood to now. How did you get here?
I probably won't really start with a childhood because we'll be here all night. How I got here really is straight after uni, I studied HR. I didn't move into HR right away. I started in recruitment. So from agency land, so it was probably more of the sales rather than the people and culture. Then after I did my time in recruitment agency, I then moved into internal recruitment. I worked for ANZ Bank at that time. And then from there, moved into technology, telco, and then later on then moved into the people and culture space. Within all of that as well, I also did my own career coaching business probably 7 years ago, which was really career transitioning. It was called Mum's Turn at first, which was really helping women get back in the workforce, given that I was doing the same at that time. And then after Mum's Turn, I realized there were other people who was quite interested. But when they go into Mum's Turn, the ones that were not mums, could actually see the statistic dropping. And then I called it Your Turn Today. And years after, I didn't continue on with that because I progressed in the corporate land. And here I am today doing career coaching full time.
So you've got extensive knowledge and experience around HR and recruitment and so on. Yeah, it's great that you have branched out on your own to help
Mm.
leaders. You spent a lot of time in HR and talent, as we've just been discussing. The world watching people get promoted and passed over. Was there some specific moments where you realized that being great at your job wasn't enough to get someone to the next level?
There's definitely quite a few factors that I seen that happen and what I learned from that. Different things. I realized that sometimes capability without the visibility of that person is not enough. I've also seen many people who were very visible. And because, it could be they had that personality really good in terms of, and I'll talk a lot about personal branding. And what I think that's quite important is actually how you actually show up. How do people actually perceive you in the workplace? Because even though I've met a lot of high performers and I've worked with a lot of high performers, sometimes, being the perception also plays a really big part.
Yeah. And when you were in that space, what was going through your mind when you saw all this happening around you?
Look, someone really good that I've worked really closely with gets promoted. Obviously, like, that is amazing, And there was someone I'm just like, oh my God, Sometimes is it the loudest in the room? Is it actually that the context of whatever it is, there were some surprises. You can really see the visibility and the perception of how senior leaders probably would see that person. But there was definitely quite a few that probably had missed out because they're what you would call quiet achievers that didn't really sell themselves enough internally. So therefore, people might perceive them as is the confidence isn't there. And if you have a manager that's also not very good in reading that, that person will miss out. But if you've got a good leader who
Yeah.
also identifies and recognizes that this person's amazing, even though they're a quiet performer, then that's good. But if they're also not aware and it's quite hard and that person gets stuck, they end up leaving. And it's almost like they have to find their tribe elsewhere that does recognize their good work.
Yeah, and we all have, as it says up here, we all have the potential, right?
Mm,
And the leaders just have to discover that potential within. And often when you're going through those PDP meetings or those end of the year meetings, in my experience, there wasn't a lot of talk about you've done a really great job and there's potential to do this and that. None of that. It was just like here's your scores and that's it. You know,
mm.
you're in this quadrant and so on. And often people also get promoted who may be technical, but they don't actually have the leadership skills and they become managers. But there's also not a lot of preparing these people for leadership. There's definitely a difference between managers and leaders. In my opinion, managers are people who lead for today and now. Leaders are ones who are visionary and have a vision and they can guide people.
I absolutely agree. And that's actually how I came up with this manager to leaders, the authority shift, because I have definitely seen that played out is, someone's a high achiever, as you said, it's promoted and then, technically sound. And then when they're actually leading a team, it's almost like they're also just realizing what kind of a manager am I? Am I the one who's going to jump in so we meet deadlines? And I've seen people like work crazy hours to actually not just do their role, but almost carrying their team. And it's like,
Mm,
well, how come you're not delegating? Like, how do you, I'm not saying push everything back to your team, but it's also your role as a leader to be able to upskill them and empower them, but a lot of things obviously do. I think that really that shift, that authority shift from, as you said, from a technical leader, or it could even be a really good salesperson,
subject
high
matter expert.
high
Yeah.
achiever. And I've seen that happen so many times where they've overachieved their quota, and they
Mm,
become like a team leader. And next thing you know, as I mentioned, I did start in recruitment agency land. And I definitely seen that very, very early on in my career. The top biller becomes the team manager. And the next thing you know, the earning capacity is the whole team has to achieve before they actually get a piece of that pie. And I've seen it in different industries play out. And I think that's really what I help people is really empower. How do they actually empower the team that they're not the one sitting in every sales meeting to be able to close the deal? Like
yeah.
how do they actually ensure that, you know, they are actually leading and being able to influence and have an impact instead of actually doing it themselves.
Yeah, 100% empowerment versus micromanagement, which I saw a lot of in my corporate days.
Mm.
And I would always, I think for me, I was like the one that would challenge the management. They didn't like that at the GM level, being challenged. I felt like it's my responsibility to manage up. You've got to be able to be able to speak your truth and be able to manage up as well. But in the corporate world, they don't actually want to hear your truth. They just want to,
Yeah, like not all. Some managers do really
yeah,
value that feedback. And I think that's where you really see the different how I differentiate that manager to leaders
yeah,
is that micromanagement, which I think comes from a place of insecurity and fear.
mm,
Whereas, a good leader really loves to be surrounded with people smarter than them.
exactly, yeah,
And it's so hard when you actually see it play out because, when people are like, oh, why do they want to be CC'd all the time? But it's also the purpose that there are times when you do need to copy your manager for whatever the purpose that is. There is also part of that, but it's probably the meaning behind that of how that particular team member has been instructed to do so. Is that sometimes it's for compliance reasons, or is that it's actually just understanding the meaning behind that. But Yeah, micromanagement, it's really, for me, yeah, as I said, I think it comes from a place of insecurity, or if it's not just the trust isn't there for the person to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Now, why do you think that traditional management courses, why is it not fixing the gap between that manager and leader?
What I've learned is, and I've sat through a lot of management leadership courses in my time. I've seen really good ones, you know. I really like the multipliers. It's, I've also sat through like an emerging leaders. I've also sat through like a level, mid level type of management, and then the one for senior leaders, all of that. But I think the whole empathy it's something that you learn through experience and leadership. All these programs, they obviously teach the person the core fundamentals of how to lead a team, the financials, the governance, stuff like that. But it's not actually until that they are already there with their team that you get the people related issues.
Mm,
How do you handle a poor performer? And it's really hard when the employee is actually a really, really good employee. It's like, how do you handle that? If an employee is like, sometimes it's really hard. Yeah, as I said, if they're a good employee, it's like, how do you actually handle that difficult situation and that conversation that goes with it? But if it's someone that you dislike, then it's almost easy to handle that performance. It's like they weren't really performing, like all of that. But and a lot of that emotion goes with it. And I think that's probably the fix that, some of the programs don't really cover.
mm,
And it's almost like you have to experience it to learn from it, like how to
mm,
empathize with, because you're not just actually managing their day-to-day stuff. People bring in their personal problems in the workplace, and it's such a fine line of how involved of a manager do you want to be, because those conversations can get quite sensitive. And with really strict labor laws around it, it's like, how do you actually navigate that? And I think that really comes from experience of just years of doing it. And until you've actually led a team that faces that's really the
mm.
only way that probably you can't cover from a lot of the traditional management courses, as you said.
Yeah, and not all managers or leaders have the ability to have those difficult conversations as well.
It's
Yeah.
not easy. I mean, I've worked with managers, for years. Sometimes, I help script it in my coaching. It's also very similar when they do come. It's not because, they can't navigate the compliance or whatever around it. A lot of it is actually how to have the conversation. And a lot of and sometimes it's just talking it through. Yeah, because you're dealing, you're being a manager, like you're also responsible for that person's career,
Mm.
and yeah, not just the work, but everything else that they actually bring in to work with them.
Yeah. A lot of the high performers feel like their value comes from doing the work and being the expert in the room. How do you help someone shift the mindset so that they can start seeing themselves as a leader who influences rather than just a manager who executes?
For me, awareness is a big thing. You
Mm,
know, if they're not aware of what they are doing, then it's kind of hard to actually for them to be able to execute and be able to influence at the same time, rather than just you know pushing things out, and they're able to execute but the influence isn't there. So which is the reason why I always go back to that awareness of that personal branding, which really is a first step in terms of when we move into not necessarily a leadership role, but any role that we move into.
how do you help them see get the awareness that changes the way they handle the day, the day to day work?
It would be it depends. Sometimes, majority of the time they do come when they are in a sticky situation and really unpack, because I don't think there is also one fix for all, and be able to, so there's different ways I would probably do is, one is to find out how aware they are and already the feedback they've probably received from people outside of the team, really kind of just find out, one person's perception is not enough. I'm always someone that would always have to validate it and really be able to identify, are they aware? And then making them aware of that. It's like, are you aware that this is actually how you come across? And sometimes it's not easy to do that, but it's good if it's actually coming from their manager to to be able to do that, not from their HR or as a coach. Sometimes when I do tell people that, are you aware you're doing this? That your
Mm,
choice of words is, are you aware that when you say that this is how actually it comes across?
yeah,
And I know it's really cringy to say, you thought about recording yourself and watching yourself. How do you think that plays out? And most people probably won't do that. But if I actually look back to when I started, is you do like these role plays and stuff like that, but very different to actually you watching you do it. If you record yourself or do it in front of a mirror, is your tone, you deliver in that tone, because the meaning then changes.
I definitely. There were moments in my career where I had to come to that awareness that I was doing something and then change it. And
Mm.
it was only if someone told me, or if I was getting the same response, I was like, why is this happening? And then I would get that. But what about feedback from your peers? And what about doing? Is the 360 feedback loop still valid and a good way to?
I hear it. When I was still in corporate, we did this training of radical candor where you give feedback. And it was really good. And I found out people were really just dishing out feedback. And then the follow up of that is, how do you actually receive the feedback and what do you do with it? Because from a receiving end, being able to say, you could have handled that better and this and that. But sometimes receiving that is quite hard. I know when I receive feedback, I have to take a deep breath. If it's positive, I also almost feel like, oh my God, like if you say thank you, am I like, sorry, overly confident? I'm like, oh, thank you. But if there's also, I didn't like how you did that because this is how it came across. Like sometimes it actually sets me back. There are still some companies that do 360 feedback, but I know I haven't really done it in the last few years in where I have worked, because a big part of that is actually when the feedback is given and how the other person actually, what they do with the feedback,
Mm,
is it actually, and I think it really needs to be geared to the performance at work, because a lot of the times when people give feedback, in another role that I did, we did this, I forgot the name of the HR tool, but you could actually give recognition and things like that, and you give cards for feedback, but you don't always know if it's a positive feedback.
mm,
And I always worry because people used to be a bit, it would actually set them back if it's like, I'm giving you this feedback to improve and it's anonymous, because it could really trigger something. And it's almost like you have to, because you also don't know if that person's going through, like a separation or something, and
mm,
it hits them a lot harder. Whereas some people, you give them feedback, they're just like,
mm,
okay, I'm sweet with that, let's next time I won't do that, but you don't always get that. So
no,
it's always a little bit tricky how you train, the 360 feedback. And if you're doing it at a wider, because so many
yeah.
managers want the 360 feedback. And I'm like, well, how do I actually guide people when they receive that feedback? Because I don't know everyone's emotional intelligence to be able to handle that. And it's always a little bit tricky doing like a mass rollout with it.
Yeah, it's partly the emotional intelligence, but the other thing is that every person has been through some level of trauma in their life,
Mm.
and if they haven't really had the opportunity to heal through it, then those triggers are going to keep popping up. And if I look back at my days of when things happened, I wasn't aware that I was doing certain things, but then I also hadn't healed from some of the things that happened as a child, and it's not until after I left that I started to sort of reflect on and go, "Ah, okay, this is something that I do, and it's probably not the right thing to do." So I feel that just like school, we are put into the system where everyone's expected to be the same, but in reality, people are not the same. Every individual is different, and every individual has been through some level of challenges in their life, or they've got something going on in their life. And
Yeah,
then to be
absolutely.
yeah, and then to be able to treat it the same as everyone else, I think it's a bit unfair, to be honest. Yeah. Now, What is the hardest part of letting go of that doer identity? Because when you get when you become a manager, some of those people still want to hold on to doing it, and even as a leader, some people are still, you know, in there trying to, rather than influence and empower, they are saying this is the way I want it done, type thing. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, look, I think I'll go back to probably when I had a team and I was still in recruitment and I had to give the budget to someone. And this person accidentally put the decimal in the wrong place. So it was almost like I was looking for over $1 million of advertising, right? And then they were like, what are you doing in Australia? Why do you? And obviously, when I woke up, this happened some years ago. So, I wasn't taking my laptop home yet at that time when I woke up and I went into work and all these emails where I had to justify these multi-million-dollar. And I was really like, obviously, I was quite upset. And I was like, why did your attention to detail is blah, 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 blah. I could have handled it better. And, but by that time, I was in such panic. I didn't know what line to look at. And that was really kind of like, I need to show someone and then look over it. And then once the first is done, then actually just being able to let that go. For me, doing it and then just regular check-in because that person probably needed a little bit more hand holding than the other person in the team that I was just like, are you good with this? Yeah. Any escalations? No. Our catch-ups were so easy, but and this is what I mean about being aware because I
Mm,
wasn't really fully aware. I'm like, I'm not going to be a micromanager because I don't like being micromanaged. And the other one really did well. Like she was just off, she was doing recruiting and then she was just off doing all the SLAs were like on time. Like everything was running smoothly. And then the other one just needed a little bit more guidance. But then I was a new leader then. Then for me, then I can actually let go more on the other one and then just provide guidance and is there actually other formal training we could probably use for the other one and then actually give more of my time here so not so much mistakes are happening. And I think for me being able to identify the strengths and weakness of my team that I can actually pull back rather than me doing everything. And I
mm.
think that was also like a delegation for me to really know the strength of the team. And I think that's probably a good, how to let go of being a doer and
Mhm.
then just knowing when to pull back.
You got to then delegate and then trust them and then give them the guidance, empower them, and go from there. You talk about self leadership being a foundation of everything else. Why do you believe a leader has to master their own internal state before they can effectively lead a team?
Yeah. Look, for me, that really goes back to depending on what state. I've definitely seen leaders, when they're in a good mood, they bring the vibe with a team. If they're in a state of, oh my God, we're not going to achieve this, that state of mind really, and this is obviously something in the coaching land, is how to get mindset of getting
Mm,
yourself into the state. And then we talk about learning like how to anchor yourself. And if every leader just knew how to do that, if you walk in at a leadership meeting and you've come out from not a very happy meeting before that and you bring that vibe, I think it's really important to know that you're not in a good, not so much state, but like it's just the energy you're bringing in the team that it's almost like the fear of not achieving, the fear of, that failure is already, you don't want the rest of the team to feel that, and you want to keep the momentum positive and things like that. So you can actually keep moving forward. So I think it's really important as a leader to be aware of the state that they are in and the impact it has in
yeah,
the team.
yeah, 100%. Self regulation. Learn how to self regulate when you come out of those difficult meetings or a situation that you're feeling fear or anger or frustration, and then your team are going to feel it. Like they're going to feel the energy that you're sending out. So
It's
yeah,
very much like as a parent, it really does set the tone. Like when a parent comes home and they've had a bad day, and then the state of mind is, pots and pans everywhere, like I'm not, you know, then everyone is just like, oh my God, what's happened with mom? Okay, that's my example, is when I'm in a bad state and I come home and I'm like that, then I really do see the whole household like, what the hell happened?
Mm,
And it's very similar in a workplace where, yeah, being aware of that because as a leader, you're obviously carrying the mood and the vibe for the team.
yeah, 100%. And what does it look like when someone is under real pressure?
That can play out. I've definitely seen people in pressure and then they drink 10 cups of coffee and then they're just like shaky for the rest of the day. And it'd probably be the same because it just has that comfort feel,
Yeah.
which is that coffee. But I've definitely seen pressure played out. So, for example, if a client of mine is really under pressure, I've got this particular one who will just call and call and call. And then I could be in a meeting and I can't pick it up. Right. And it's almost like it's just so constant because something so small can go really big. It's like digging, yeah, it's like it could just be like a small mole and then now it's gone into this big mountain.
Mm.
And I think that's really how you see, and that I need this, it's a little bit like that. And it's like, hang on, just stop and wait. That sometimes talking it out, let's talk it through, where is the pressure coming from? Okay, let's reset the expectations here and the boundaries, you know, why are we not gonna, and I think it's just sometimes unpacking that to ease off the pressure.
Pressure is actually not a bad thing. Like if you take coal and you put it under pressure, becomes a diamond. There is good pressure, and it's not that pressure is good or bad.
The right
It is,
amount.
there's the right amount of pressure is actually going to help you um, evolve into a better version of yourself.
Mm,
So I believe that the right amount of pressure, the right amount of um, even fear is good because
mm.
it helps you push past your comfort zone.
Yeah. I think that also depends on the person's coping mechanism because some work really well under pressure. I mean, for me, sometimes I do love it. And then I have my third cup of coffee and I'm just like firing through, and some people probably it really exhausts them and things like that. It turns into a really stressful situation. So I think it depends just how people cope with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I always found that for me, pressure is actually something that I work better under pressure than I did when I don't have pressure because it keeps me accountable and I know what I've got to get done and I've got a short amount of time to get it done. And then there's no procrastination because you just get on with it. Right.
Mm,
So it comes down to the point where you get so disciplined that when that pressure comes on, you just get in there and do it.
yeah.
That's how I function anyway. So how do we start building that self-awareness if you've never been taught how to look inward, how to look into because we've been taught that everything we desire, everything that's going to help us is external. But the number of conversations I've had on this podcast is that and what I've been learning is that when you go inward, that's when you find the answers.
Yeah, you're right. So how do we build self awareness?
How do we start building that self-awareness if you don't have never been taught to look inward?
One thing that I probably don't want to see, and I've definitely seen this played out, and what I've learned is I've definitely seen people who are not aware and it hits them really hard in the face. That it's almost like you're not calling it an awareness. You can probably catalog it as awareness, but it's almost like a wake up call. And it's almost like, what did it cost you to get to where you are? And I think that's really, and then they see that as a learning, but not having that self awareness is actually really important because if you're not aware, you may not actually know what you need to improve on, but you might also be very good on something. And if you're not aware of that, it's like, how do you actually enhance that? And they may not call it as awareness, but it's just knowing that they're good at it or knowing that it's not an area of expert subject for them. So it's really important. There's so many studies now. There's so many different types of frameworks and all of that, how to move into that positive mindset and generates creativity and innovative thinking and all that jazz that we're aware of. And we think we listen to podcasts and we read books and all of that about it. But not knowing and not being aware is, I think it's quite important to be really aware. And if there's anyone that you do come across that's not very self aware, there's this freebie of the personal branding that could really help. It's
Mm,
just about what do you actually want? What do you want to be known for? What do people actually say about you? Not
What's the
necessarily
legacy?
bad. Yeah.
Your legacy that you want to leave.
Yeah, because not being aware, and then you're just wondering, why do people keep leaving? I'll give an example. It's like a particular team, and everyone keeps resigning without any job, and the person's not aware that they are the problem.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that in a transport agency that I was in, where a particular team, I think we lost something like 6 people in a space of like a year,
Mm.
and it was just the management style.
And it's costly. And that's what I mean. It can really cost, but if you don't actually understand the root cause of that particular turnover, you're not aware that it's that particular style that's not working for everyone, then it can be very costly. You can do as many analysis and, exit interviews and all of that. But, if no one's going to speak up and, the person's not aware, then that's probably the cost of not being aware.
I think sometimes people are aware, but they just don't want to.
They don't want to
Uh,
change.
they don't want to change, and they don't want to acknowledge that there is something that they've got to do. They've got to change something within themselves. And the example that I had was where it was at a group manager level, was trying to control every part of but the managers weren't being empowered. So there was a whole lot of conflicting information. Then the staff were getting frustrated because they're getting told one thing to do, and then this person's coming and going, "No, this is what I want." And they just had a guts full, and they just one by one left because people weren't feeling safe. People were feeling you know, like you come to work on a given day and then you get told off for something because that person's just not regulating themselves.
And sometimes it's that control, isn't it? That
Yeah.
person just wants control. And is that like a leak from somewhere? Is that like a unhealed trauma probably? Look, I'm not a trauma healer, but it's almost like something's unresolved there and this is actually the leakage that's coming and it's showing up in a workplace
Yeah.
scenario.
It is, and I think it's also sometimes it's in your relationships at home. Things like you may be, you got your masculine and feminine, right? So you might be at work, you might be the masculine, but when you get home, the other
Mm.
partner could be the masculine. So all of a sudden, you're having to, do what that person says, and then you're not having a good time at home. So you come to work, and then you let it out on other people.
You
So
bully everyone and have your
yeah, exactly.
chance.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, for me, basically, when I left that organization, I actually sat down with that person for 2 hours and blasted that person, spoke my truth and said, this is,
It's very
and
courageous.
that, well, I always have been that way. And I'm like, I would go into meetings and say to my GM, you and I are going to have a difficult conversation today. And
Mm.
he would look at me and go, what? I'm like, yeah, we're going to have a difficult conversation. But I had to make sure that when I left, that I spoke my truth because there was things were falling apart, and after I left, it actually got worse, way worse, right? Because I kinda was the glue that kept all the teams together. So, yeah, it's interesting, and also sometimes when you're in a when you've got like, 'cause I was in a role that interacted with the business and the technical teams, so I was kinda like in the bridge between the 2. So when that bridge falls over, then all of a sudden, there's no there's no one there to do the work that you're doing. But there's also when you're doing such a great job, that person feels threatened. Or I actually had someone at my level, another manager at my level, came to me and said to me, "Can you stop showing us up because you're doing such a good job? Can you stop showing us up?" And I was like, "That's not my problem. This is the way I work. It's your opportunity to level up. And here's a benchmark that I'm setting. So level up."
That's crazy. I can't believe people would say that, but I believe you that it does happen. I've definitely seen
It's
that
happened.
played out.
It's happened multiple times, and that's the information that I needed when I left corporate world. With that, this is not where I'm meant to be because actually, I'm meant to be more at a higher leadership level where I'm empowering people and helping people. Whereas I was stuck at this level where I wasn't enjoying it, and every the person the people above me were feeling threatened by the knowledge and the way I worked because I was building relationships with the business. Often when there's pressures, and then you can't deliver because you're spread too thin, because you're trying to do everything as well as a leader. And what you said before earlier on, which is when you empower your people, then you release yourself from all of that pressure and you're letting them take on the accountability of it. But the thing is, when you don't give the empowerment to your managers, then what you're doing is they are saying to themselves, well, I don't need to be accountable anymore because that person's doing everything, right? So it just comes back and bites you in the bum,
And then
unfortunately.
that fear of, am I going to lose my job? Did I just make my job redundant? You know, which is also a very another kind of topic, that opens up.
Yeah. And for me, it was like, okay, I was a high performer, but then often they don't want high performers because they want people to do the work and do what they're told. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, hang on, this is not resonating with me. This is not aligning to my values. So I've actually made myself redundant because done such a great job that things are functioning really well. So yeah. Anyway,
You just
that's
changed the whole org design because you were doing
well,
so well.
I did, because when I joined that organization, I had an intention that I was going to change this organization from within. And I did. In 3.5 years, I did change that organization. The key thing was that the managers at my level were the ones that could have been more engaged with the business and providing the thought leadership and building that relationship. But the challenge was that when I left, because they hadn't done that, all of a sudden they were forced to do that, and they found it really hard to build that trust and respect with the business. Whereas I'd been doing it for 3.5 years on behalf of those managers. So if you don't take responsibility for your own self and your own teams and you rely on someone else, when that person goes, you're all of a sudden left going,
Business continuity is gone.
gone, it's gone. And the business then start to lose trust and respect. Now, we've all had probably worked with someone who leads through fear and control, and that's what we've been talking about. In your experience, what is usually happening under the surface for a leader who operates in that way? And we've been talking about this, I guess, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I mentioned about, I think that person's coming from insecurity of their own or fear of, as you said, if I do such a good job and I start upskilling, what am I going to make myself redundant? I think that it's operating from fear. That it's not really, yeah, then it's not really, what a leader should be, which is actually guiding. And I always, compare this to when you're a leader, you're like the coach of that team. You're not the one on the field playing, you're the one guiding them. There is always a role for the coach. I don't know if you've ever seen kids' junior sport played without a coach. It's a mess. Everyone's like running around.
everywhere.
Yeah. But when there's a coach guiding them, get into formation, do this, don't do that, it runs smoothly and wins all around, hopefully wins all around. And I think that's where it is that if you do have, someone operating, micromanaging all of that, and it's a fine line, is the person actually managing, micromanaging, or do they actually just want updates from, are they actually based globally that they just want some kind of a report? That's also very different. But I think micromanaging, you'll know when someone's kind of like not giving you that trust and not trusting someone, it is not really a good talent retention. Yeah, you don't want to be like not trusted in your profession where you're hired for your skill set. So it's good to have that trust with your employees. And obviously, if it's something that you're not actually comfortable giving them that trust, then where is that coming from? Then maybe
Yeah.
perhaps give them that feedback to actually strengthen their performance and the trust is actually built.
So what would you say the first step is to move away from that control based style?
I think it goes back, the person needs to be aware if they're a controlling manager or not.
Mm,
Because if they think, oh, this is how I actually keep that grip on my team, if they think that that's the right way, and it's so much like chain of command, because if that manager's manager operates like that,
mm,
then they might think this is the way to do it. Or is it kind of a manager that really trusts their team? And the thing
mm,
is, if someone's actually worked for a good leader before, a good manager before, and then you go with a micromanager, then it's almost like you're comparing. That person's able to compare it with someone else, and it's like, well,
yeah.
I don't want to be led like this. And
So how
most
do
of the,
you, yeah,
yeah.
How do you help leaders get that awareness?
Well, if it is actually something that in the land of HR, I think it's also your responsibility to lead, to help leaders actually is it a development course, give them that feedback and work through it. So there's obviously a lot of different types of, exercises to find out what type of a leader are you. Are you a helicopter leader? Just falls into that micromanagement, and I remembered when you do that, people are a bit like, oh my God, this is me. Oh my God, am I like this? It's like, yeah, yeah, you are, but when you do those, it's a little bit fun without you directly saying this is your leadership style and it needs to change, but actually also being aware how to navigate it, because someone might need that particular leadership style and then a different one for a different person. But it goes back to that. Are they also open? So I think it's really good to have those structured leadership programs in place,
Yeah.
to be able to identify what type you are. And that's how you build that awareness. When I do take on, when I do my coaching and I let them do the disc profiling, then I know what kind of communication style they're at.
Mm.
So if they come across like, oh, people say I'm so direct, why can't they just do what I ask them to do? And then when I do the disc, I'm like, oh, you're very strong in D, you know? It'll be good to understand what the rest of your team are, because if they're the opposite of that, then obviously that clashes. Then how do we actually adjust yourself so you're actually getting the message across to your team? Because if
Mm.
everyone's like, if you're leading a team that's very high in inspiration and all of that, then can you imagine how long the team meetings would be if everyone's like really inspiring and no one's actually a D or a conscientious? Like nothing will ever get done. So I think it goes back to that awareness of what is your style and how do you actually navigate through that.
When I lead people, I always ask for their feedback. Like I
Mm.
go, "How's everything going? Is there anything that you need my help with?" Or is and um, I always want to hear so that I can become a better version of myself. Often in meetings and in a team situation, some people may not want to speak up because they feel scared that they're going to be, you know. How do you deal with those situations?
I've definitely seen that, when that not speaking up, and it is actually a problem on its own. Because unless you actually speak up, how do people know what the problem is? And I've definitely seen that fear of speaking up. And it can be very costly not knowing what is going on. I know companies do engagement surveys, but it's also what do you do with those surveys,
Mm.
right? So I always used to sit down with my leaders when I was in corporate land and we'd go through, there were always 20 questions. We'd pick the top three. What do we improve on? What do we work on? It can't be all 20 because it's like over promising and never able to deliver, but like pick the top 20. The top 20 pick the top three. If you're working with a manager that just wants to file it away and then let's look at it next year again, and then the themes are very different, then that's probably adds into what's the point of doing the feedback. And I've also seen it that the different cultures also don't want to speak up. And, fair enough, we got to respect that culture, but it can be very costly not when people don't speak up. And there are ways to do that. A lot of companies do have like an integrity line that you can also speak to obviously your manager or your people in culture, that you can actually give that feedback or whatever, or even just really speak up. I remembered when I read that Sheryl Sandberg book, that Lean In. And I think that was probably 10, 15 years ago when I read that. And it really resonated with me because she talked about that not speaking up, just not really being able to lean in and have a voice at the table. And it's not as easy to just give your feedback, just speak up and all of that. Because there's also other factors in place. I'll give an example. I'm not a tall person whatsoever. I'm probably stand at 5 foot. And then, I used to work with so many tall people, and the voice projection already was an issue. Like if I really we needed to be a sitting down if I had to get my point across, for example, let alone if you're standing and then you had to justify something, it can be quite hard. But I've also seen it played out with some people that in the coaching line and in my previous in my previous roles that I've done, just that fear of what if I'm rejected? But I think towards the end, I'm just like, well, if they don't like what I'm going to say, but obviously I'm not going to say it in an insulting way. But being able to lean in and speak up is quite important, but also takes a lot of confidence for the person to do that
Yeah.
and how it actually is taken and what they actually do with that. And if it gets shut down, it can be quite a bit of a kick to the ego.
Yeah, and we're going to go into that in the next question. One thing I was going to say is that I've been thinking about this intentionally about like once my organization gets bigger and I've got managers, I've got people working, I don't personally, I want a different type of organizational structure where basically it's flatter, where the staff, the people who are doing the work are actually at the top and the bottom, and the leader is at the bottom lifting them up. So effectively, the people who are doing the work are the experts. They've been hired to do a particular they're specialists. So a leader's job is to support them. A leader's job is to unblock things. A leader's job is to go and talk to other departments. So I feel like the whole org chart needs to be flipped around where leaders are at the bottom and the people are actually above them. Not in any hierarchical way, but it's more like when you're a leader who empowers and supports your team feels supported and they feel like they've been lifted up. And Simon Sinek talks about this a lot. You know, you got Brene Brown also talks about, these kind of things. And yeah, really feel that in the 25, 30 years that that I've worked in corporate, I think there needs to be, or even in any business really, the leader actually needs to take a back seat rather than the front seat.
Mm,
And I think with AI and automation, you're going to see a lot of this where the leaders, they'll be there to make decisions and the strategic level. But when you get to the operational level, that's when the leaders need to lift the people up and
yeah.
go, you go. I remember, when years ago, I had this band and I said, you can jump on this band anytime. It's like a train. You jump on this ride, you jump off anytime. Um, and in my career, when people were like, if I look at the last couple of jobs that I was in, I was like, "What do you need? Eh? What can?" And so people then would respect me. They would be more open to telling me what's going on for them
Mm.
because they've got the confidence in themselves and the courage to be able to say, "Hey, I can approach Anthony anytime." And when I left, a whole lot of people said to me, "You've been the best manager, even though you weren't a direct manager. You're the best
Mm.
manager we've worked with because there was no hierarchy. It was like, let's do this." Now, let's talk about courageous conversations. So that's something that many people avoid because they want to be liked or have the fear of conflict. How can someone start building that confidence to have those tough and necessary talks? Especially what we've been talking about is that, you know, it's hard for people to go and talk to their leader because of fear.
Look, it's hard, but I think if you're going to give someone feedback and have that courage to do it, it has to. What is your intention of doing it? So I'll give you an example. When we were doing this radical candor, one thing that they actually use as an example, it was actually quite simple. It was someone doing a presentation and then they had something on their face. Like they've just come back from lunch, did a presentation, and then had like a spinach stuck in their teeth. And that was the example that was used. Now, what do? Do you just let them go and present and have this thing in your teeth and you're just looking at the whole hour of, "Oh my God, Anthony's got spinach in his teeth." You don't right away. Or do you like, are you chatting to your friend going, "Oh my God, Anthony's got, you know, something in his teeth"? Or do you actually say, "Should I tell him or should I not? Should I tell him or should I not?" You know? Or just go, or just sit there and enjoy the embarrassment of your colleague or your manager. But really, the right thing to do is probably quickly message them and say, "Hey, you've got something between your teeth." Pause it for 2 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever, reset, and then go back. Right. So that's kind of obviously in a simpler version of how do you give the feedback. And it's obviously not, the person could be very embarrassed going, "Oh my God, I can't believe, that. But at least you didn't go on with a training for 90 minutes with something between your teeth." So that's kind of like how I would always explain it. in terms of actually how having that courage, and it doesn't have to be quite big. And I have definitely given feedback before and it wasn't taken well, and then I'm the devil. But that's okay. I can be that the one. I'm always the one that challenges the status quo. But I'm always like, what is my intention of doing this? Do I want to do this because I want things to improve, or am I doing this just to have the last say?
Mm.
So it's also that reflection of going back. Do I really want this? How do I actually want this played out? And what's in it for me? So I think that's probably, when people say, oh, how do I approach this? Is what's in it for you? What do you want out of it? And do you really, when you rock the boat, how strong are you to be able to stand through that?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree with you. How have you witnessed dynamic teams when the trust is finally established?
I always think it runs smoothly. I always find, that if the trust is there, that you just trust it gets done. The goal setting is easier, the boundaries are set. If you need the boundaries or the goals adjusted, then it's easier. It's an easier conversation. It's coming from a place of respect to say, Anthony, I can't do it on Friday. Instead of probably Friday, you're like, where is it? Where is it? But the trust is there, and say, look, I'm going to be honest and upfront with you. I've got so much on. I'm not feeling well. All of this. Friday's a bit of a stretch. Do you get someone to help that person? Do you jump in? What do you do? Right?
Mm.
Instead of actually leaving it. And trust is, it's a really good foundation, not just in a workplace, but in any kind of relationship that the person is in. I mean, can you imagine if your partner forgot to say, I'm going to pick up our child, and then the school calls because they haven't been picked up, then the trust isn't there. Then that's very similar in a workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to, into what we were talking about leadership styles before. Have you heard of Captain David Marquette, who was he was the Navy captain who served in the submarine force for 3 decades? Have you heard about that story?
What's the name
No.
again? I'm going to look it
So
up.
the book he's written is called "Turn the Ship Around." Turn the Ship Around.
Hmm.
His name is Commander David Marquette. That's
Hmm.
Marquet, and he's a retired Navy Sea captain now. But he was best known for the way he managed the team. So, like it says here that when he took command, he trained extensively for a different submarine because each submarine is different in the way it functions, and the crew have to learn how to drive that particular submarine. They can't go to another submarine and know how to drive it. So the USS Olympia, when he gave an order for the Santa Fe that was technically impossible, his crew blindly followed it, and simply because he told them to do it. So then he shifted and said he realized that the leader follower model was dead. It was deadly. So instead, of telling people what to do, he then flipped it around and said to his team, he said, "Well, you tell me what I should do." And they were like, "No, no, no, you're the commander." He goes, "No, but I've trained in a different submarine, so I don't know. So I'm asking you." So what he did was he flipped it around and asked his team to lead. And so it's a great story about leadership in terms of when you don't know as a leader, you know, ask your team because the team knows everything.
It's almost like the apprentice has become the master.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's too much Star Wars happening in the house.
All
That's my
right.
inspiration at the moment.
Yeah. So last question before we go into the quickfire questions. So if someone is listening right now and they feel like they are the best kept secret in their company, what is one thing that they can do this week to start changing how they are perceived by the decision makers?
I think start with yourself, really believe in yourself. So if you are listening to this, and one thing that you can change is if there is something that's been holding you back and you're like, should I do it? Should I not? You know what? Just do it. There's nothing worse than, probably holding back and say, I should have, could have been that, whatever, you know, like just don't overthink it, because I'm an overthinker, and that's something that I really had to learn how to overcome, and really just do it, like think about it, write it down, look at the pros and cons, and if there's something holding you back, is just speak up and just go with that idea or whatever it is that you're probably been sitting on. because there's nothing worse than than losing time, you know?
And how is it gonna help them show up in meetings?
Well, if they already know, they show up in a meeting and it gets knocked back, then you will know to come up with something else the next time. But if you're just sitting there, someone could come up with the idea and they go, "Oh my God, Anthony, it's amazing." And then you're sitting on it. It's like, I was going to say that. I was going to, and I've seen that happen so many times. It's like, well, why didn't you? It's like, oh, I thought of it. Well, no one can hear your thoughts. It is really just to give it a go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Shirley. And this age, personal branding is so important. Because even even lots of people like Daniel Presley are saying that your company brand is no longer as powerful as your personal brand, because it's tied to a person. So, what would you say to a person who feels like their personal branding sounds a bit fake or corporate?
Yeah, I've definitely had that. Probably not so much fake, but they say, oh, that's such a corporate thing to do. Now that I'm working with, you know, business owners and they go, oh, I love corporate. It's like, no, this actually, even more so if you're a business owner, how important it is. But for corporate people listening to this, it is not fake and it's just not for corporate because personal branding, you can call it what you want, but it's pretty much, you said it's the legacy that you leave, but it's really about as your authority shifts, as you shift from an individual contributor to a manager, from a manager to leadership. It's really about what people say about you when you're not in the room. And they might say, oh my God, the most amazing manager whatsoever. Or they might say, that was the worst, you're the worst. Don't you want to be able to do something about it? It's like if you were to write a story about yourself, and there's so much power in storytelling, as we know, which is why we're in this podcast, is it's really good, going back to that awareness or just knowing what you're good at and not good at is really important because if you don't know yourself and you're not aware of it, it can really impact not just work scenario, but relationships with your friends, your family, at home, all of that. So I think actually personal branding is definitely an exercise and it doesn't take long. I've already done all the hard work for you. All you got to do when you sign up, you will see it. I think it takes 15 minutes. It will just guide you. It's for free. And you can really it will just take you through. You can write it down or you can really just, think about it. But I think it's quite important to do that exercise. And it's not a one thing. I did that 10 years ago. It's like, yeah, you're a decade younger before, you're in a very different position back then. It's actually good to just revisit that once in a while so you know how are you actually showing up and how do
Mm,
you want to be remembered.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Now, Shirley, if people have been watching this and listening to this episode, how can they get in touch with you?
So you do have that. You'll see it here. I can write it down at the bottom, and you can just do that. And you can subscribe to the newsletter that way. Or I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn person. I'm on LinkedIn more than Facebook. Also on Facebook, obviously. But yeah, so if you just go to Shirley Sutton, the one in Sydney, so that's definitely how you can get hold of me. And obviously my website, www.ascendly.online. So there's just many ways to get in
Yeah.
touch.
And we'll put those links into the show notes, but you'll get a dedicated page for this episode on the
Oh,
Champion Mindset
fantastic.
Collective. So all that information will be there. There'll be your bio, your links, be about the episode. There'll be an article from this transcript. There'll be a practical guide that people can download as well with everything we've discussed. There'll be like a 3-page guide that kind of distills down into something that you can download and take away and start to apply in your life, along with the guide that Shirley's got. And there'll be the videos there as well as lots of other information. So, and there's an academy coming. So if you're watching this episode and you want to know more about these topics, the Champion Academy is going to be launched shortly. Who knows? Shirley might want to host a course or something on there at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And watch out because I would love to have Shirley back on some webinars and masterclasses on these topics as well. All right. Are you ready for the quick fire questions? 6 very quick fire questions. You can answer these in a short sentence or a single word. And the first question is, How do you define success, and has that definition evolved for you over time?
Yes, success definitely has evolved for me. If you asked me about success probably 10 years ago, I'd probably say it's to do with career and wealth and all of that. But for me, success really is that feeling of accomplishment, whether it be coming out of a great meeting or just having a great day, for me, that's probably what success is that sense of feeling of achievement at the end of the day.
Yeah. Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
Oh, I think because of some of the chats I've been having the last couple of weeks, I won't go into too much detail of that, but I actually think my grandparents have actually been a really great inspiration for me. My grandmothers, in particular, really both very strong women. Yeah, I think I've got a lot of really strong women in my family, my aunties, all of that, just the whole transition that they go through and still going through in their lives now. And if you ask them, they're probably, I don't even know if they realize it's a success or not, but just really thinking about, from the conversations of transformation I've been having, how they've gone through decades and really be able to lead their careers and lead the household that we grew up in. I think they really do inspire me.
What is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
I believe that hard work is really important, probably more than talent, because I've definitely seen talented people who don't have the commitment. Whereas if you ask me, obviously both go hand in hand, but I do believe that hard work and motivation and commitment is more important than talent.
Yeah. If you could go back and give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I think don't overthink things. As I said before, just do it. Like, don't be like, oh, like think about it, but not too much, just you're losing time. Just go for it.
Yeah, 100%. What is one message that you like to share with the world?
Just be your authentic self. Because if you are true to yourself, then your career path and your path will just actually, you know, I think it's almost like the road will just open up for you rather than really saying, rather than probably trying to really fit in. I do believe that if you just show your authentic self, as long as you're not hurting anyone with how you portray that, you'll be a lot happier because it's your natural calling and it's your natural way of learning and doing things. And it
Mm,
just makes that transition a lot easier for you.
yeah. It's like Bruce Lee said, be like water. Go downstream, not upstream. Yeah. So
Yeah.
make your life easier by just being your true self. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think, there's different ways of learning. You talked about school is quite a way of doing things, which I think is very visual if you're looking at ways of learning. And I think if you just actually find and be true to yourself, you will just naturally go down that path
Yeah.
instead of actually forcing yourself. And you'll just find your own tribe. You'll just find the right company that appreciates you, the right manager that appreciates you and recognizes you, and just be really yourself and it will just find its way there.
Thank you, Shirley. Last question is, what does it mean to you to be a champion and have a champion mindset?
Oh, look, for me to be a champion is, really good at what it is, but for you to have clarity of what good looks like. So for me, having that positive mindset is quite key to have that champion mindset. Because if you're also not really clearly defining what success and that achievement looks like, then it's quite hard to say, I've achieved this and I'm a champion at this. So that's probably for me is what a champion mindset is, having that positivity and
Mm.
just really believing in yourself and having that mindset.
Thank you, Shirley. I appreciate you and for joining me today on this episode.
Thank
My
you for having
takeaway,
me.
yeah, my takeaway was that in this chat was that leadership is not something that you're given as a title. It's something that you have to claim by changing how you see yourself first. If you've been watching this episode and you found this helpful, please subscribe. It's amazing how many people are watching but not subscribing. So please subscribe. So the more we subscribe, we can get this out to the wider world, and share this with someone who may benefit from this, someone who's ready to take the next step. If you can find the links in the show notes for share, and you can also look at the episode page on the Champion Mindset Collective And lastly, I just want to say you are loved, you are worthy, champion your life, champion your greatness, and have an amazing day.
Thank you.